Okay, we are live on YouTube. And hello, everyone. I'm sure we are live on YouTube. Able to log in and watch us right now. We're still trying to iron out some technical. And we're still trying to log or to clean up some technical difficulties. Chris Gloninger is running our show for us. Chris, are you going to open the credits? I can see you, but you're not on screen.
Yeah, everyone, I am here, but in the middle of Texas with no cell phone service, so I'm going to remove my video and hand it off to my co-hosts today, David Thorson and Channing Dutton.
Wait, just 1 second. What are you doing in Texas? Tell our viewers.
Yeah, we're working on a project which is taking us to Kerr County, where those deadly flash floods were in July. So more of that at another time, but that is why we're in Texas.
All right, Chris. So Chris is going to run the technical aspect of the show. Are you going to be able to give us an opening, Chris, or do we just should we just go from here?
I can roll the open.
All right. So we'll technically begin when we roll the open. Hello, everyone. This is Channing Dutton, and you're on the 3 Degree Podcast. Today, we're doing many different things, and we have one killer dynamic guest with us as well. We are at the Grandview University campus as a part of a month-long event for Grandview in which climate and environmentalism, water are all the features of the focus. And we're here because of the students. Now, this is a student-led event, but as we see in many aspects of water, environmental, and climate activism, we are sparse on students, but we've got good, loyal friends here with us as well. And I'm going to turn it over to David Thorson to make the introduction for our guest today.
Thank you very much, Channing. It's my honor and pleasure to be on today with my co-host and also someone that I think the state of Iowa knows very well by now, and that's Chris Jones, who's former hydrologist at the University of Iowa, whose provocative work and blog caused quite a flurry of excitement, entertainment, and consternation, especially in the GOP legislature and the state house. And Chris was forced out of his job and not really retired, because he's now a colleague of mine and ours at the Iowa Writers Collaborative, and has written this fantastic book called The Swine Republic, which goes into Iowa's water quality nightmare related to industrial agriculture in the state of Iowa. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Chris Jones today as our guest. And I look forward to this conversation, and I know our listeners are going to love having you on.
Well, great. Happy to be here, Dave. Look forward to this discussion.
And Chris, both Chris Gloninger and myself are running some of the controls, so we apologize in advance if things pop up awkwardly. It's the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. But I'd like to start by having you give our audience just a brief background of what brought you to write the book Swine Republic. What were you seeing? What was going on in your life? And why was it necessary to go to the novel, or not novel, but the book?
Well, so I never set out to write a book. You should know that from the beginning. When I went firstly, let me say I worked at the Des Moines Waterworks from 2003 until 2011, and I got a little bored with things there, and I went over to the Iowa Soybean Association. They had an environmental group there, and I worked there for 4 years. And then in 2015, I went to the University of Iowa. And when I started in Iowa City, they asked me, well, would you like to have a website? And so all the PhD research staff and faculty could have web pages. And so I said, sure. And I had done some writing in my previous jobs. And so I intended from the beginning to have a page on my website where I would write essays that were intended for general audiences that would try to communicate the science of what me and my colleagues were doing. And so in my previous jobs, both in Iowa and in Minnesota, I had done some writing, and I knew I was an adequate writer. But I don't think anybody really knows how good they are at writing. And so I'm in that camp. And so I wrote essays for a few years and hardly anyone read them. I would look at the analytics on the essays years later, and maybe 6 people had read them. And then I wrote one called "This Is What Happened," which was kind of a history of water quality and agriculture in Iowa. And I thought, this is pretty good. I sent it out to about 200 people in my address book. And then before long, I had, thousands of people reading this thing. And so as I wrote these essays over the years, I never intended it to end up in book form, but it did. And so the book was published in two years ago, May 2023. And so I'm still writing on my Substack, which is riverraccoon.substack.com.
Yeah, and for our guests, let me urge you to jump on to Substack and find at River Raccoon, because that is Chris's site. And Chris Gloninger, if you can roll the quote from Chris Jones's post about our governor race here in Iowa, that would be appreciated. But let me tell our guests that what you're seeing now is language that Chris Jones used to describe concerns about gubernatorial candidate Rob Sand. For those of you who aren't in Iowa, Rob Sand is a pretty good guy. He's got a pretty good resume. He looks like a really good Democrat, but he's weak on issues that cause the ire of Chris Jones, and Rob Sand has paid back the favor. And so, Chris, would you talk with us a little bit about what happens when you take on the leading Democrat before the primary has even landed on us?
Well, okay, a lot of what I write is polemics, right? And so, and people think my ire is raised, as you stated there, and I get a chuckle out of that. My ire is not raised nearly as much as people think it is. But when you're writing the way I do, and you're critical of a problem that is really recalcitrant and really we've made no progress, there's no point in sugarcoating it. And so I don't. And I do try to inject humor into my writing, because I think that can and does take the edge off a little bit, right? And so people get a chuckle out of things. And so I try to, send a little humor Rob Sand's way too. And so I would say the problem isn't just Sand. I think the Iowa Democratic Party should be embarrassed how they've approached this issue. And so Sand clearly is reluctant to talk about this. I mean, you don't need to believe me. I mean, there's lots of people that say the same thing. He went on this 99 county listening tour, and at many of these places, people would say, they would ask him questions on water quality and environment, and he really had nothing to offer, and still doesn't. And so that's really part and parcel of the Iowa Democratic Party. And so there's very few candidates or people that are in elected office that really want to discuss this. This is a little mysterious, right? We have 3.2 million people in Iowa. Only about 80,000 of them are farmers. And so why are we so reluctant to discuss this? In Sand's case, his in-laws are in agribusiness. They own a number of different agribusiness entities. And so, it begs the question, would Democrats tolerate this from a Republican? If a Republican had a family that were agribusiness titans and they didn't want to talk about water quality, Democrats would not tolerate that, right? And so I don't think we should tolerate it from sand either. I think he needs to be poked and prodded to try to embrace this issue.
So for some of the people that are not in the know, Chris, could you just explain a little bit about how the expansion of agriculture in the state of Iowa, and especially because of ethanol, has affected the water quality so greatly, and what the real problem is in Iowa that we're trying to solve and get our politicians to speak to and address?
The real problem that we have with water quality in agriculture is we have no diversity on our farms. And so we have two species now, corn and soybean, that cover about 70% of the state. We are never going to get the environmental outcomes that we want when we only have two species on the landscape. And so we know that nature likes diversity, right? We know these systems work best when there's diversity. We have no diversity on our landscape. And so the resultant water quality that we have is very predictable, should be expected. And so as we have lost diversity in our farms, the water quality, especially the nutrient pollution, has gotten worse. Well, what caused that loss of diversity? Well, the emergence of soybeans was the big thing. And so before soybeans, we had oats, we had alfalfa, we had clovers, we had some small grains like wheat and barley, we had sorghum. And so when soybeans came in, that crop displaced all these other things. And so the number of corn acres statewide really hasn't increased all that much. But the big issue is soybeans. And when we went to two crops, that required a lot more tiling, for example. A lot of other things happened. And so now we have the ethanol industry that has really entrenched corn, right? We produce way more corn than what the country could use if we weren't using it to produce ethanol. And so the ethanol industry and the livestock industry too has kept us entrenched into this two crop system. And so, hogs and chickens and other animals, they eat soy. And so all the system now is really aligned with these two crops. And so we can't shake out of that, right? And so we can't get any diversity on our farms.
Yeah, could you little follow up here, Channing? I was just wondering, Chris, one of the other articles that you wrote that we've talked a lot about is Iowa's real population. And so the other factor that we have interacting with the Iowa landscape is CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations, and especially hogs. And you wrote this great story called Iowa's Real Population. And can you talk about how that is also affecting the water quality in the state?
So prior to the emergence of soybeans, we had many farmers across the state that had livestock, right? Excuse me. Many had cattle, and at one time, I think we had about 60,000 farmers that had hogs, and now we only have about 5,000. And why is that? Well, again, these GMO crops are really pretty easy to farm. It's dirty little secret here is that if you're just farming corn and soy and you don't have any livestock, you're really not working very many weeks out of the year. Maybe 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And so consequently, a lot of farmers, they don't want livestock anymore. And so these livestock have been concentrated into CAFOs. At the same time, that we're not feeding them forage crops anymore. We're feeding them grains. This is kind of grease the skids for that. And so the people that still have livestock have these huge operations. And so the number of hogs over the last 25 years has about doubled. laying chickens, we were as high as 80 million at one time. I think we're down to about 55 million. And so we have our chickens on very concentrated feeding operations. And so all of this has kind of coalesced such that the system now favors a few farmers raising a very large number of livestock. Well, that translates ultimately into manure. And so these animals have to eliminate their manure. And when we look at the amount of waste that's eliminated by our livestock animals, so hogs and chickens and beef cattle and dairy cattle, that waste is equivalent to about 168 million human beings. And so there's really no surprise here that our water quality is the way it is when we have that much fecal waste being distributed across the landscape, and it's not treated, of course. Human waste is treated.
Chris, the topic for the presentation here at Grandview, and all of you students who aren't here, shame on you, but the topic is the water will kill you. And so can you give us an overview? If you're talking to somebody from, Nevada who doesn't understand the Iowa water situation, how grave is the water situation for the people in the state of Iowa?
I think if you're drinking from a private well in certain parts of the state, grave is a good description. And so we've had 6,000 private wells in Iowa get contaminated with nitrate above the EPA limit, which is 10 parts per million as nitrogen. We have thousands more that have been contaminated with E. coli. And so if you're on a private well, if you're not getting that tested every year, you should be, to make sure that water is safe to drink. Then we have municipal supply in the cities. And so we know we've had a number of cities around the state that have had issues with high nitrate, Des Moines being one, right? And so they supply about 600,000 people, mainly in Polk and Dallas County. And so every year after year, those folks around Des Moines are drinking high nitrate water. And what do I mean by high? Well, we know from the scientific literature that drinking water above 3 parts per million increases your risk for certain cancers and also increases the likelihood of birth defects for women that are pregnant. And so lots and lots of people are drinking water where we have health risks associated with that nitrate level. And again, we've known this for a long time. The scientific literature going back 25 years showing these risks. And so now finally we see that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the United States, and we're the only state where the cancer rate is increasing. And so this is what you might expect, right? These environmental exposures oftentimes don't manifest themselves immediately, right? It's exposure over a lifetime, right? What we call a chronic exposure. And so I think there's plenty of reason to believe that the water we're drinking, is driving at least some of this cancer that we're seeing in Iowa.
Well, let me follow up a little bit and first remind our viewers that you can get this same podcast on Substack, on Spotify. We're actually on YouTube Live right now, we hope, because it's a new adventure for us. But give us a like, give us a follow, add a comment. There was another speaker who always wanted to say, prove me wrong when he was on a college campus. Well, we would welcome people who want to prove us wrong on these issues, because we need an open and important dialogue. And one last thing about the 3 Degrees podcast, we've had a couple of candidates on already who were willing to talk climate with our show and with the viewers. And so, Chris, I want to focus you on State Senator Zach Walz and candidate Sarah Trone-Garriott, who's running in Iowa 03. Both came on the show. And in particular, Sarah Trone-Garriott said, I don't buy the that we're safe at 9 parts per million of the nitrates. And my memory of the show is she said we need to be at 3 parts per million nitrates. Give us a handicap on those candidates. Do you have an opinion about who might be a good candidate to protect the water and in turn, on our favorite topic, act on climate?
Well, I live in Iowa City, and Zach Walz is my senator, right? I live in his district, and I think Zach Walz, in my estimation, has not done a good job on this issue, not at all. And he's especially been very pro-ethanol, which disturbs me because, we've said just a few minutes ago, ethanol is what keeps a lot of this system entrenched the way it is. And so I can tell you, I've never heard Zach Walz talk about water, never. And so I think he's been in the legislature maybe 8 years or so. Sarah Trump Garrett, I don't know her as well. I don't know of her as well. I've never met her. I think she's right that 9 isn't safe, right? I think that's correct. And so the EPA standard of 10 has been under review for a long time. And there has been some expectation that EPA was going to lower it, but the forces preventing that are very, very strong, and I doubt very much that review will continue under the Trump administration. But I think the next step is, if it does get lowered, will probably be 5, or there'll be 2 standards, maybe an annual average, and then a one-time sample. And so my guess is they might leave the one-time sample at 10 and then require an annual average be below 5. But again, we're years away from that. And so I don't think 9 is safe. I have an RO system in my house in Iowa City. Iowa City has high nitrate water also, as does Cedar Rapids, Boone, Manchester, Cedar Falls. Decorah at times has had high nitrate. And so we have lots of communities around the state that suffer from this.
Chris, on this show, we talk a lot about the intersection of climate, water, agriculture, how these intersections are taking place, and our changing climate is affecting things. But one of the things you and I have talked about over the years a bit is the inefficiency of ethanol and as energy, and how solar and wind and battery storage and these new real clean energy systems could be more dominant in the state of Iowa. Could you talk about how the comparison of the inefficiency of ethanol compared to, say, solar and wind energy, and how agriculture could be the big time winners if we transitioned into these other energy systems?
So 1 acre of solar panels is the equivalent of about 51 acres of corn grown for ethanol. And some people would say it's more than that. Some people would say it's close to 100. And so at any rate, solar panels, acre per acre, between 50 and 100 times more efficient than growing corn for ethanol. So clearly, producing or growing corn to produce ethanol is not exactly, it's a huge opportunity cost, right? It's a lost opportunity. And so we know that, we can have utility scale solar in Iowa. We know that. And so we see Dubuque has, some utility scale arrays, and there's others elsewhere that can produce electricity very cheaply. The other thing that we know is that livestock, especially cattle, can graze amongst solar arrays. And so this is a real opportunity for farmers to do something that's more environmentally friendly, will produce better environmental outcomes, will improve our water quality, and allow us to still make money off that land in, doing some agricultural function. And so in this case, grazing. And so in my view, there's a lot of opportunity right now for cattle because beef is so expensive. Hamburger is about impossible for the average person to buy. And so there's opportunities here for Iowa farmers. We know that grazing cattle is a much better way to do it rather than putting them in feedlots and other confined systems. And so farmers that wanted to go this route, there's a big upside to doing it.
Do you think that now Governor Reynolds has almost, come out and said that we have a state-sponsored fuel in ethanol? Do you think that it's just the power of the agricultural lobby that is stopping us from this transition to the clean energy boom in rural Iowa and rural America? What is it that is stopping us when we know that real clean energy like solar, wind, and storage is the future? What's stopping this from happening, Chris?
Well, that's certainly part of it. As you say, the lobby, we have all this infrastructure that exists to support ethanol, right? Nobody likes to abandon their infrastructure. And so to go to something different will cause some recapitalization. Again, nobody wants to do that. The other thing too here that we know is the price of Iowa farmland increased in lockstep with the amount of ethanol produced in this country. And so a lot of land wealth was created here in Iowa with ethanol. And I think that's part of the equation here too, that people that own farmland, they know if we got rid of ethanol, the price of that farmland is going to go down. And I know that might be painful for some people and maybe for some rural communities, but the thing is, if land did go down, if the price of land did go down, there could be some really good benefits to that, right? And it would enable young farmers to get into the occupation, people that perhaps would like to do something other than just growing corn and soybean. And so I think we really need to think about this in the context of land reform. What could we do with this land to try to preserve its value if ethanol went away? And so there's absolutely no creative thinking about this, and it's really frustrating. And so I think the status quo is a comfortable place to be for people that are in Iowa farming and for the ethanol industry. And so, we really need to challenge people. We need to challenge politicians, and we need to challenge the industry. Look, it's time to do something else. Monty Shaw, who's the head of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, said way back in 2005 that ethanol was a bridge fuel. It was a bridge fuel to get us from petroleum to something else. Well, you know what? We need to blow up that bridge, right? We're crossing that bridge. We've got solar, we've got electric vehicles, we've got wind, and we have a bunch of other stuff. And so we need to cross the bridge, blow up that bridge, and move on. And we really need to talk about this. And it's really a failure of both political parties to do it.
Chris, we're coming towards the end of the show, and I want to make sure that we ask you one more question that connects the bigger picture of the state and water to climate change. We often say on the show we want to look to the day after tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but what do you see the rising storms doing to the basic quality of water in the state of Iowa in the next 15 years? I don't want to go to 2100. Let's just go out 15 years. What are we going to see?
Well, I think what we're going to see is more of this prolonged periods of dryness followed by prolonged periods of wet weather. And so it's what some people are calling the whiplash effect. And so we have these droughts or mini droughts where we get no rain for 2 months. And then, for 2 months, we get all kinds of rain. And that seems to be the way we're headed. I mean, we saw some of that this year for sure. And so I think as these oscillations, if you will, in precipitation, really dry, really wet, there is no doubt that is going to make the nitrate problem worse. Okay, there's no doubt about that. We've already demonstrated that with research. And so I think that's the big thing here. Will it ever get bad enough here in terms of heat and dryness that we can't grow corn? I have my doubts about that. These crop geneticists have really done some amazing things with these crops, making them drought resistant. And so all these predictions of, the Corn Belt moving north, well, I don't know about that. I think we're always going to have a lot of corn here in Iowa and a lot of soy. And I think these crop geneticists at least have demonstrated up to this point that they're pretty skilled at adapting these crops to changing weather.
So Chris, one last question before we go. And I know you spend a lot of time looking at, past Iowa climate, kind of what we're in now, where we're going in the future. If you could see a transformed landscape with some of the solutions that to the problems we've been discussing, what would the Iowa landscape look like 15 years from now if we could do the things with some of the solutions that you've discussed over time? What would our landscape look like if we could transform it?
Well, there's people that want to see, wide swaths of Iowa return to prairie. And although I think that sounds great, right? Desirable, I think that's not reasonable. It's utopian, and I don't think that's going to happen. So what we need to think about is how can we get marginal land out of row crop production? I think that's a big deal. We have too much marginal land that's being cropped. If we could get that marginal land into pasture, that would then support pastoral systems where we have cattle commingled with forage crops like alfalfa and clovers, and then corn. We're always going to have the corn. And so I think that's the sort of thing we need to plan for, is we need to try to get marginal land out of production and then get a greater diversity of crops on the landscape. This system is not resilient. I mean, it is plain for anyone with eyes in their head can see this is not resilient. The pollution is a manifestation of that, but it's also not resistant economically. And so we see when someone like Trump comes into office and has some unconventional views about trade, what happens? It blows up, right? The system is not resilient economically. And so when you only got 2 crops and all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, oh, we don't want your soybeans anymore, that's a big problem, right? You don't have economic resilience anymore. And so we need a diversity of crops, we need a diversity of people, and we need a diversity of economy on the landscape to make it resilient to what's happening with climate.
And there you have it from the great dynamic Chris Jones. He's all over the state from time to time. Go see him. Chris connects the dots almost as well as Chris Gloninger does. And I know that Chris is chomping at the bit down there in Texas, but he is doing important work covering the catastrophe that happened at Camp Mystic down in Texas just on the July 4th weekend. So take a minute and think about what your next step is. I mean, we have a water catastrophe. Our health is in danger. It's going to get worse, and climate change is going to drive it. So talk to these candidates. We've been discussing Rob Sand, Zach Walls, Sarah Trone Garriott. These candidates need to hear from you. And it wouldn't be right of me to not thank Mary Klein-Miesal and Christine Curry for all of their work here on the Grandview University campus to make this whole event happen. And again, for our students who are sleeping in, there's still time to wake up and find your voice. And Rob Sand, I'm talking to you too. On behalf of David Thorson, Chris Gloninger, I'm Channing Dutton. Thank you for watching the 3 Degree podcast today.
Okay.